Hello, my name is 환산스님, and this is Sun Meditation in English. Now, before we enter into our guided meditation together, long-time viewers will know that in Chapter 20 of our program, Episode 20 of our program, I proposed that that we could undertake the 100 Days to Change project. So during a term of 100 days, we would try to change something in our lives, the way we do something, either eradicate a negative habit or add a positive habit to the way we live on a day-to-day basis and try to reach some short-term goal that's measurable. Now, I've been conducting this project. I continue to conduct this project with college students under my supervision in Seoul. And what I would like to do for the moment is for those viewers and those members of our studio audience who are doing this 100 Day to Change project, I would like to encourage you to continue even if things are not going your way, even if you got off to a strong start and then as time passed and maybe we got busy, maybe something happened, or maybe somehow for some reason our enthusiasm waned and we may be falling off track. Nonetheless, it's not so important that we succeed on a day-to-day basis so much as we learn about ourselves. We learn about our self-defeating habits. We identify those elements in our environment or even those individuals in our network of social relationships who, for whatever reason, might be hindering our ability to focus on goals that will enhance our enjoyment of life and our development as people. So once again, I would like to encourage those of you who have undertaken the 100 Days to Change project, don't worry so much about consistency and focus more on self-examination and self-understanding and being able to reflect objectively on how we behave and how we live. So whatever we're doing, whatever's on our mind, let's put all of that down, and now let's enter into guided meditation together right now. So first, we assume the proper meditation posture. So we will enter into preparation breathing now. Together, inhale through the nose and completely fill our chests. Hold. And then exhale thoroughly through the mouth. Whatever may be upsetting us, whatever we may be obsessing about, use the preparation breathing to let go of it. Once more, inhale. Hold. And then exhale. And now let's engage our abdominal breathing. So in abdominal breathing, once again, we inhale and exhale completely through the nose, no longer using the mouth. And when we inhale slowly and naturally and in a relaxed manner. And as we inhale, we push our lower belly out slightly, as if it's filling up with the air that we're inhaling. Then we hold for 2 to 3 seconds. And then when we exhale through the nose, again, slowly and comfortably. And as we exhale, we draw our lower belly back in toward our spine. Okay, so why don't we do this together? Inhale. Hold. And then exhale. And the more our bodies relax, the longer each breath cycle becomes. The longer each breath cycle becomes, the more joyful the act of breathing becomes. The air begins to feel like a cool, silken flow through our bodies. And we begin to understand and learn that we can bring joy and happiness into our own lives in the present moment through the simple act of practiced breathing. And now we engage our hwadu, the question that we focus on and ask ourselves in the course of meditation. So we inhale, hold, and then as we exhale, imoko, imoko. In English, that's YIMWOTGO. And it means this, what is this? What is this that directs my body? What is this that generates my thoughts? What is this that responds instantly and recognizes instantly the call of my own name? We're going to ask this question to ourselves and generate the state of doubt, the state of mystery, the state of questioning our own existence, the state of trying to know the unknowable, to see the invisible. It is a state of feeling blocked, of trying to reach for something but being unable to get there. Okay? So once again, breathe in, hold, and then on the out breath, Imoko. As we create and maintain and increase the state of doubt, it begins to burn away our extraneous thoughts. It clarifies both our minds and our bodies. It centers us. It brings wisdom and compassion into our lives, even before enlightenment, through the simple act of practice. So we can see the benefits of meditation right away when we practice this posture, this breathing, and this hwadu, the question, imoko. One more time, why don't we try it out loud? So breathe in, hold, and then together, imoko. Once again, I will ask everyone to continue to do this breathing and holding the hwadu, asking the hwadu to ourselves for the course of the program. Now, the topic of today's contemplation and meditation is our relationship with food. As people become more and more aware and conscious of their health and what it takes to stay healthy and live a healthy life, people are naturally also becoming more and more concerned about their relationship with food. They're very concerned and worried about what they eat, how they eat it, and how they think and feel about their relationship with food. Many people worry, especially in this very stressful, competitive modern society, many people worry that they are using the pleasure and thrill of eating to compensate for a lack of real joy or happiness or a sense of meaning in their lives. It's as if they're literally trying to use the food to fill a kind of spiritual and psychological emptiness they feel, as well as trying to fill themselves on the physical level. And in many cases, people find it hard to control their eating, to regulate their eating, and they worry about their health and their personal appearance. But if we look at certain kinds of data that have been released over the last decade or so, we know that a large segment of the population is dieting at any given day, and that most people are spending a very significant part of their lives going in and out of these diets and trying to get some hold over eating, their eating habits. So the question for today is, what can the Sun Buddhist tradition, its teachings and practices, offer to those who are struggling in their relationship with food? Now, in that regard, the Sun Buddhist tradition takes the issue of eating, our relationship with food, with an extremely high degree of seriousness. It is said within Sun Buddhism that if you can regulate your eating in a healthy way that supports your spiritual practice, then you are already halfway to enlightenment. That's how serious eating and our relationship with food is taken. And it's not just within Buddhism. Probably all major religious traditions in the world take our relationship with food extremely seriously, and they make very, very specific and disciplined, austere regulations and rules about what we can eat, how we should eat it, when we should eat it, and so forth. So it is an extremely serious matter. And I think if there's a real distinction between the way traditional religious teachings deal with the issue of food and the way modern people seem to deal with it, I think that the vision would be that modern people seem to look at their relationship with food in terms of, the impact on their health, and both physical and psychological. And then also how it makes us appear, its connection to our physical appearance. In modern industrial societies across the world, there is an increasing trend toward being overweight and obesity. So people are very concerned about how they look. And finally, the pleasure of eating itself, that eating is considered a major part of our enjoyment of life and our quality of life. But things are very different in the Buddhist perspective and in most religious traditions in the world. From the Buddhist perspective, our relationship with food is seen mostly in ethical and spiritual terms. And the reason for that is that the Buddhist traditions deals very directly with an aspect of eating that I believe has been lost in modern society. It has been lost, and we are paying the price for it. And what that aspect is this. Probably, especially in modern life, there is no activity that we undertake that so directly reflects the true nature of our relationship with our environment, with the planet around us, and with other life forms as eating. Every time we walk into a restaurant or a supermarket, every meal that we sit down to is a reminder of a very stark and graphic ecological reality that most of us prefer not to think about. And what that reality is that almost all life forms on this planet must consume other life forms to survive. That is something that's very hard to get our heads around. But even plants, if you go into a forest and it looks very idyllic and peaceful and tranquil, and that may be so to humanize, but the fact is even plants and trees compete with one another to get sunlight. When you see these plants and trees intertwined around each other, it's not an embrace of affection. They're trying to get maximum area of foliage, leaves, exposed to sunlight at the expense of their neighbors. And we may think that certain kinds of plant life don't subsist off of other life forms, that they just use water, sunlight, and soil. But the definition of fertile soil is that it is filled with the remains of other life forms. Life forms always live off of the death of other life forms, whether they catch and kill these other animals or plants directly, or whether they simply live off of the decaying remains. Now, this is a very graphic and difficult reality for us to have to deal with. But in every religious tradition, and especially within Buddhism, this reality is faced head on. And we can see within the history of Buddhism, beginning with the day that the Buddha stepped up to become a teacher and receive disciples, we have seen a development of this effort to try to regulate our relationship with other life forms, with the natural world, through our eating patterns in an ethical and spiritual way. So, it is said that the Buddha, after his enlightenment, was actually reluctant to become a teacher. And it is in that moment when he makes the decision to go from being a spiritual seeker and a kind of enlightened being to becoming a teacher and taking a role in the world of human beings, that we see that he must take on this issue. So I would actually like to bring us back to that moment when he does this, and we will understand that the issue of eating is directly connected to the formation not only of religion, but of a civilization that we can feel sort of ethically and spiritually, not in conflict with. So it is said that when the Buddha was newly enlightened, he was sitting in the forest and he was wondering what to do next. And he considered that he might teach what he had attained to other people, but he was very, very hesitant about it. And I would like to read now from the sutras that have been preserved, what is the description of what he was thinking about and the kind of conflict that he was undergoing when he considered teaching what he had attained to others. This Dharma that I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment, is excited by attachment, enjoys attachment. For a generation delighting in attachment, excited by attachment, enjoying attachment, that conditionality and dependent co-arising are hard to see. This state too is hard to see, the resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, unbinding. And if I were to teach the Dharma, and if others would not understand me, that would be tiresome for me, troublesome for me. So he felt that in such a world as ours, it would be very difficult to teach a system of being good and attaining enlightenment. And so then he concludes, enough now with teaching what only with difficulty I have reached. This Dharma is not easily realized by those overcome with aversion and passion. What is abstruse, subtle, deep, hard to see, going against the flow, those delighting in passion, cloaked in the mass of darkness, will not see. So he begins to make a decision not to step forth and assume the mantle of a spiritual teacher. And according to legend, the Indian god Brahma, residing in a transcendent realm of consciousness or reality, becomes aware of the direction of the Buddhist thoughts and becomes very, very distressed. Brahma thinks, the world is lost, the world is destroyed. The mind of the Tathagata, the Arahant, the rightly self-awakened one, inclines to dwelling at peace, not to teaching the Dharma. So Brahma, very distressed, descends to earth, appears in front of the Buddha, and in accordance with Indian etiquette of the time, lowers his right knee to the earth, puts his hands together in prayer position in front of his heart, and implores the Buddha, Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. Let the one well gone teach the Dharma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are falling away because they do not hear the Dharma. There will be those who will understand the Dharma. And then he implores the Buddha, throw open the door to the deathless. Let them hear the Dharma realized by the stainless one. Just as one standing on a rocky crag might see people all around below, so, O wise one, with all-around vision, ascend the palace fashioned of the Dharma. Free from sorrow, behold the people submerged in sorrow, oppressed by birth and aging. Rise up, hero, victor in battle. O teacher, wander without debt in the world. Teach the Dharma, O blessed one. There will be those who will understand. And the Buddha is convinced, is persuaded by the sincerity of this divine plea. And he says to Brahma, open are the doors to the deathless for those with ears. And the Buddha accepts the mantle of becoming a spiritual teacher. And as soon as he does that, he has to now face all of the practical realities of creating an organization. Until now, there is no Buddhism. There are no Buddhist monastics. There's just the Buddha, who was once a seeker and is now an enlightened being who has no social role as of yet. And so he has to decide how he's going to structure the life of his future disciples. In other words, he has to worry about their food, clothing, and shelter. And he puts together a set of teachings based on his own experience as a wandering ascetic. So with regard to clothing, he declares that his disciples will wear thrown-off rags, clothing that nobody needs anymore. Literally the clothing that's put on corpses when they're prepared for their funerals in the graveyards. they will take those, they will sew them together and create the first monastic Dharma robes. So the issue of clothing is settled in that way so that there will be minimal harm to life forms, because within the Buddhist traditions and within most of the Indian religious traditions, there is this great reverence for life, this reverence for life runs against the ecological reality that we face, where life forms all consume other life forms. So you're really trying to, as the Buddha puts it in the excerpt, go against the flow. With regard to shelter, he declares that his disciples will live under trees in the forest, so that they don't have to build houses, they don't have to own property, they don't have to go into economic conflict with their fellow human beings, and they incur minimal damage to the environment. But it's in the relationship with food that we really see how the Buddhist disciples will relate to the world, both the natural world and the world of society where most people live. So he has his disciples become alms beggars, as he himself had always been. And he sets the rule that his disciples will live on the edge of towns. And they will enter into the town, and then in those days the monastics only ate one meal a day. They will enter into town and visit 7 houses and beg for alms. And if they get nothing that day, then they get nothing. And with whatever they get, though, they come back together at the edge of town in the forest, and they share what they have in an eating ceremony. Now, this eating arrangement dictates the relationship that this newly formed monastic sangha will have with conventional society. Many people think that monastics completely renounce society. This isn't true. The Buddha asked that the monastics set themselves at a specific distance from society, but not sever all relationships entirely. And the monastics will enter into a kind of contract with conventional society. And what that contract is that they will ask to be fed on leftovers. So no further life forms need to be destroyed to feed them. So they are asking for the generosity of the people who live in conventional society. But in return, they will teach the wisdom that they gain in their own practice. So the convention, the tradition, and the rule was that if these early monastic bhikkhus visited the houses of these various town dwellers, that they would receive food, but in return they would give counsel and share their teachings. And so within Korean Buddhism, this arrangement is known as providing dharma in exchange for rice. And in this way, the monastics would spiritually sustain conventional society as they were being physically sustained by society. And what we have here is the formation of this monastic society that is not intended to replace or govern normal society, but act as a spiritual and ethical guide or model for normal society. And they are to be in relationship with one another, but they're not to be joined and unified. So it's a very subtle balance that he creates between the so-called secular world and the monastic world. And it is done through eating, because eating is so profound. Now, this tradition in India, when it was exported into China, the Chinese Buddhists had a different problem, because the Chinese climate had 4 seasons, and there was a winter and a summer during which the monastics wouldn't be able to wander around doing their alms begging. Because of that, the Chinese Buddhist monastics had to create much more landed Buddhist communities. They actually had to own property. And so instead of alms begging, they began to live off of the donations of the laity. But the principles were the same, that they would eat off of what was given to them, share it, and hopefully through their existence, the damage or destruction of other life forms would be minimized. So we see in the Buddhist teachings and in the Buddhist tradition a way of eating and a relationship with food that is based on a reverence for and a cherishing of other life forms and an understanding of our place within the natural order. These are concerns that now our modern civilization is colliding with. that these are concerns that we perhaps have forgotten, but now we're reminded of because of our impact of our eating habits on the natural world in which we live. Now, in Korean Buddhism, this way of eating is sort of most concretely enacted through the so-called bowl ceremony of eating, which Korean Buddhist monastics perform during their spiritual retreat seasons. And the bowl ceremony is simply an eating ceremony that's designed to allow us to continue our meditation through the extreme stimulus of taste, of the flavor of food. Because flavor and odor are so connected to our memory centers that when we eat, it has a very disruptive effect on our thoughts and emotions. So this whole ceremony was designed, first of all, to preserve our meditation, preserve our focus, so that we can meditate even in the act of eating. And then secondly, again, within the Buddhist tradition of revering all life forms, of minimizing waste. So this is how the Buddhist tradition, this is a very, very rough sketch of how the Buddhist tradition over time has dealt with the ethical and spiritual conundrums that are raised by the problem of eating and by our relationship with food. So now what I would like to do now is take a break here, and when we get back, we'll consider how we might take some of these teachings into our own lives to enhance our quality of life and also to find a more healthy and ethical way of eating and preparing food. Once again, the topic of today's contemplation and meditation is our relationship with food. And to review briefly, in our relationship with food, in the act of eating, in our confrontation with the reality that almost all life forms must consume other life forms to live, we as human beings come face to face with this excruciatingly paradoxical condition of our existence, of the existence of the natural world, where life and dying and death and killing and birth are inextricably linked with one another. And to try to get some sense of good and evil within the terms of that paradox can be confounding at best and painful, even terrifying at worst. Now, unfortunately, in my mind, in modern times, the ethical quandary and the spiritual quandary posed by the need to eat has, I think, been increasingly lost in our modern society as eating becomes more an act of socializing and an act of giving ourselves pleasure. And I think it's very interesting that as time passes, in the preparation of food, especially in modern societies, the food is prepared in such a way that it no longer resembles the life form that it once was, whether plant or animal. They're so processed in all the various ways that cooking techniques allow, so that they begin to look like objects, works of art, and that's how we treat them, and we forget the life that was once within them. In modern times, I think we're more concerned with sort of the psychological ramifications of our relationship with food, and probably the most significant one that has gotten some attention in the past few years is the connection between eating and love. Because eating is not only the destruction of life forms. According to this theory, eating, being fed, is the first act of love that most of us ever receive. As infants, we're completely helpless. Most of our senses are not even working. Our eyes are closed. We can't move our bodies. And the only thing that we know is being fed, usually breastfed if we go, the traditional natural way, but being fed by the mother. So in being fed, there is an equation being created between eating or being fed, being loved, and living and surviving. So eating is life as well as death for us. And any time that we eat, according to this idea, any time that we eat food, we re-experience that connection between eating, life, and love, especially receiving those things. And because of that, according to this idea, it's because of that connection between those things that we often tend to eat when we feel bad, especially when we feel bad about ourselves. This is why, according to this theory, eating provides such psychological consolation, because we are reminded of the days when we were held and protected and loved. And although we can't return to the maternal or paternal embrace, we can sort of mimic it. We can remind ourselves of it by giving ourselves things to eat. But this relationship, this sort of interaction or this dynamic seems to have gone out of control in our modern society. We go to food in the absence of love and joy in our lives, and we almost replace it. Food becomes an excuse not to seek out those things. Food becomes an escape portal. Food becomes a kind of retreat. And in the end, we begin to form an addictive relationship with food, where food is treated as almost a recreational drug. And this is where our relationship with food starts to become toxic. And the various industries that produce and distribute food, at their worst, may exploit this relationship. Now, I've heard that in the sort of prehistoric environment, before there were civilizations and settled settlements, when human beings were still foraging and whatnot to eat, that we're sort of designed to eat anything that's sweet or salty or greasy, because very little of those things existed in our original natural environment. And so we have a natural inclination to just eat as much of it as possible. Some say that it's genetically encoded into us. And this is why, in modern times, when you want to sell food, in mass quantities, you can make it either really sweet or really salty or really greasy. We're drawn to that. It's sort of taking advantage of an evolutionary mechanism within us. And this is why our relationship, a mechanism that was once designed to sort of protect us, is now pulling us in the direction of addiction. This also accounts for why this connection with food and love and feeling protected also accounts for why, and I think this will resonate with people who live in foreign countries. This is why when we live in a foreign country for even a short while, even a couple of days, we begin to miss the food that we're accustomed to in our homeland. This is the first thing that we usually miss, even more so than actual individuals. So this connection is very, very powerful, and it needs to be managed. But in modern times, it needs to be managed, I believe, in the context of a greater ethical and spiritual framework of our relationship with other life forms and the natural world. I believe that we have strayed too far in the direction of understanding our psychological relationship with food and not so much our ecological one. And now, as the environment becomes threatened by the human presence, it may be time for us to return to what these ancient traditions like Buddhism have to tell us about the original nature of our relationship with food. That there is a strange paradoxical connection between our conflict with other life forms in trying to survive and eat, and our interdependence upon one another. Conflict and interdependence go hand in hand, and the Buddhist teachings were designed for us to manage this strange contradiction, this strange paradox in our relationship with other life forms. This is why the Sun tradition will teach us that we can be in harmony with nature and develop such careful procedures for collecting and eating food and making sure that we don't waste it. In one of the earliest rules of the Buddhist tradition, one that is attributed to the Buddha himself, is that when the earliest Buddhist monastics went out alms begging, they wondered whether they could take milk from a cow. And so the Buddha declared that you can, but only I believe it's a week after the calf has been born. So for the first week, the newly born calf, who needs food, sustenance much more than mature human beings, they get the sort of the first priority. And afterward, human beings are allowed to partake of that milk if it's offered to them. So there is this extreme reverence for individual life forms as well as the natural world. And this is still something that human civilization is struggling with. That the ecological order tells us that individual life forms ultimately end up as food, either in the soil or in the stomach of another life form. And yet religious tradition tells us even so, these life forms are sacred and they have innate value. And we're trying to find a way to balance the paradox between the conflict between life forms and the need to preserve them. This is an issue now that I think has become crucial at this time in our history. And not only for politicians and economic leaders and policymakers on a grand scale as we try to figure out how to use the water that we have and the land that we have and what kind of food to raise, whether it's livestock or plants, not only on the mass level, but on the individual level as well, because it's the accumulation of individual habits and tastes that will create mass trends. And the reason why I have sort of broadly reviewed the relationship with food as seen within the Buddhist tradition is because that it might do well for us to ask ourselves the same questions that the Buddha must have asked himself when he began to form his Sangha community. And that is, if my eating pattern is the most direct bottom line indicator of my relationship with this world, and it is the measurement of my impact and influence upon this world, how shall I eat? What shall I eat? What attitude will I bring to it? And we can use the Buddhist tradition as guidelines for this. We can minimize our eating, revere what is set in front of us. Buddhists say prayers and chant poems and bow before eating, especially monastics in the traditional bowl ceremony, to remind us how hard it was for that food to arrive at our table and how much sacrifice was involved. So maybe that's an example that we can take to heart too, even if we don't perform it in a ritualistic religious way. And in terms of what we eat too. Now there's an argument for vegetarianism that's often made. But for myself on a personal level, it's become known that somehow plant life forms also seem to have some level of awareness or consciousness. They respond to music, they respond to people, they respond to emotions. So, the traditional division that we find in Buddhism between animal and plant life may not hold anymore. Scientific research may reveal that they too possess some level of consciousness that we don't understand. And one thing that I can invite you to do is go into meditation, meditate for a while, and then look at a plant. Look at it very carefully, without distraction. And what you may find is that you may feel like you're standing in front of an intelligent, aware, self-conscious being who is aware of you. And that can be a very, 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 very interesting experience in our spiritual practice. But this is something that I would like to encourage our viewers to do. That if we're having problems in our relationship with food, think of the ethical and spiritual implications of the way we eat. Understand where we are, that we're sharing the world with each other and with other life forms. And then start to formulate the way we eat and what we eat in the context of what we understand of our relationship with the world. Now, the last thing that I would like to say on today's program is this. Currently, the Buddhist sanghas are fading away in the world. There are very few, even Asian countries, that sustain a full male and female bhikkhu and bhikkhuni sangha. And I believe that this is extremely regrettable, that we are in danger of losing one of the great treasures of the human legacy. I believe it is a sign of the civilization and cultural height of any society or nation that they're willing to sustain, to support an institution or a monastic society that is solely devoted to the attainment of wisdom, life wisdom, not to the accumulation of information, not to the systemization of that information into knowledge, but wisdom, the ability to see into reality clearly, the ability to see into human nature clearly, the ability to see into the future clearly, and make long-term decisions in a wise and compassionate way. That I believe that every society in the world, and it doesn't have to be Buddhist, ought to find a way to support and take care of these monastic societies or spiritual practice societies whose sole goal is the attainment of spiritual wisdom, and that this ought to be continued. And this is one of the reasons why I have come out on this program, that these communities contain wisdom such as the bowl ceremony, such as the ways of eating that can help us in these days, and that they ought not to be lost. So maybe we can reestablish and reinvigorate that ancient relationship, that ancient contract that was made between the Buddhist Sangha and general society, that the wisdom of the Dharma would be given in return simply to be fed and sheltered. Okay. So I think that will be it for today's program. Once again, I will thank our viewers for attending and performing meditation with us. And once again, thank you to our studio audience members for participating. And I will close once more with the traditional Buddhist greeting. May we all attain the Buddha.